mode.
Good morning. Welcome to our webinar today. It's with just a bit of sadness that we have because of the events in Brussels, but we're glad that you're able to join us. We're going to be talking today about visibility vulnerability. This is the third in the 2016 series that is presented by Firestorm in conjunction with our good friends at the University of Alabama College of Continuing Studies. We'd also like to have you as our friend on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. On Facebook, Firestorm Solutions. On Twitter, Firestorm Soul. There is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We remind you that the presentation today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and this information should not be considered legal advice or legal opinion, and it should be discussed with advice from your organization's personal counsel. Firestorm is delighted to have our good friend Brenda Truelove. She's with the College of Continuing Studies at the University of Alabama. University of Alabama College of Continuing Studies has been our supporter here for going on 3 to 4 years. Brenda, over to you, please.
Well, good morning, everyone, from the campus of the University of Alabama. We're fresh off of spring break, and we had our normal Monday, where are we, why are we at work? But today we're back at it, and we're very happy to be continuing our series with Firestorm. Very happy that we have some people on the line today to learn about our corporate engagement endeavors that we have really been focusing on for the last couple of years at the university. Corporate engagement, we go under the brand name of Bama at Work. And we try to engage with businesses to find out what keeps them up at night, what things they believe that they have vulnerability to, and try to find resources to help them with stated needs in the areas of leadership, HR, any of those business acumen type needs that all businesses have. So we connect with senior team executives, the managers, the functional team leaders, frontline supervisors, and we provide training and or consulting services on succession planning, leadership, talent development, innovation, basically anything that a group needs. We've just recently completed some assessment plans for some large corporations, and the first thing we try to do is to listen, to see what they need help with, and then we perform a comprehensive needs assessment, identify the resources that would help meet their needs, and then we follow through with the on-site training and then evaluating what went right, what we could have done better, how they can go forward. And then, sometimes we follow up with on-site consulting with individual team needs. But we're here to help share the full resources of the University of Alabama to meet corporate needs. Our new Corporate Engagement Division Director is Dr. Bob Prescott. He's had such a wide variety of experience in the field of leadership. He has taught in the graduate MBA program at Rollins College for over 15 years. And he's just a delight to work with. He's just funny and witty, but also knows his subject matter as well. So we're very fortunate with both his business and higher ed background that he's going to be leading our corporate engagement division. So we're just asking everybody to let us know, contact us through our website, or my contact information is on the website, truelove@ccs.ua.edu. And we're here to serve. So thanks for the opportunity to partner, Jim, with you and Firestorm, our great partner.
We appreciate it, Brendan. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and with Bob and the others there at the University of Alabama. I was fortunate enough to be there in January for the cyber breach conference that was put on and the involvement and related to that. And I think it's a great resource that helps not only the alumni of the University of Alabama, but corporations around the country. So here's a great resource that you can tap into to get those insights and to get the support when you need it in that direction. I'm glad to be with you today. It's Jim Satterfield from Firestorm, and we're going to talk about this concept today, a little bit of visibility vulnerability. And as Bill mentioned at the start of the webinar, today we're, I think, all focused on the events out of Brussels, the bombings that occurred at the airport and in the subways. And I'm reminded of all of the factors that we see in a crisis repeated again here, where the initial information is wrong or incomplete, that there's confusion in that direction. And clearly, when you're in a position like that, the visibility of these events put a significant pressure on everyone involved. So we'll try to do some insights on that as we go along today, but we really want to focus in on this subject that we've selected. So what do you do when you're the target? And Brenda had on one of her slides that she was talking about what keeps you up at night. And if you think about your planning within your organization, it could be a workplace violence event, as we have seen, or a terrorism event as of today. But it could be a tornado, like the ones that came through Alabama a number of years ago and hit Tuscaloosa and had an impact. Or it could be a product recall within your organization. So, but when you find yourself as the target in this particular situation, it changes the equation in what you can do and what you need to respond. Because always, as you look at this, you're going to find out that someone knows, and somebody knows more than you do on the subject that's involved. And so that information starts to flow in and hits a wall and doesn't come to you, and you end up being the last to know. And our little figure there looks like he's not very happy about being the last to know. And so what you have to be able to do is to take the information, add the insight that you bring in to perspective with that, and that creates intelligence that becomes actionable, that relates to the individual plans that you need to have. So if that information is out there, someone knows. And the question is, do you know, and how you can know what's going on around you? Because that intelligence will make a significant difference to you in being able to manage the situation to a positive outcome. And it places you in a different visibility position because someone, in fact, does know what has happened or what is about to happen or what just occurred before you do. Now, as a general rule, we try to focus on, is the surprise good or is it bad? And there's a town in Arizona called Surprise, Arizona. It's about 200,000 people. So waking up in Arizona, in Surprise, Arizona, is probably a good thing for them, and they seem to be very pleased about it and are proud of it when you look on the website and learn about Surprise, Arizona. But generally in business, surprise is bad. If someone comes running into your office and they're talking about something that's happening, it's generally not good news. It's a problem that's occurred. There's an event that is going to happen from that standpoint. I often talk about the last time a surprise was good. I was 5, and it was my birthday. As a child, we were raised in an environment where surprises are generally good. As we grow into adults and move into business environments, we find out that they are generally bad. So part of what we're going to talk about today as we look about visibility is trying to know what's going on around us and see how that impacts the decisions that we make associated with it. Now, we find many organizations are in disaster denial, or individuals within them are. But we're in a different world today than we've been in the past. Today, everything is foreseeable, just as we look at the events that have occurred in Brussels and after the earlier terrorist attacks that occurred in Paris and the arrest of the terrorist here in the area. You're starting to see that there are people that can come back and say, you know, it was foreseeable that there'd be an event. And when you think about creating a terrorist event, you want to go where there are groups of people, and airports are clearly one. And I heard someone talking today about the difference between the amount of explosions that you could carry in a vest versus the amount of explosives that you could put into a rolling suitcase carrying it in, and then the disruption into the subway systems by the bomb planted there. So today we're in an environment that everything is foreseeable. But tomorrow we're going to be in an environment where everyone may be accountable. A couple of things come to mind here today. In 1993, there was a truck bombing at the World Trade Center, and the terrorists got it in and set it off, and was later found and convicted in a criminal trial, but there was a civil trial that most people were unaware of. And in that civil trial, the jury awarded damages as follows: 2/3 of the liability to the building owner, 1/3 of the liability to the terrorist. Great country, America. How could they say that I own the building and somebody else tried to blow it up and I'm twice as liable as they are? And the answer was it was an identified vulnerability and threat, and that the jury felt that the building owner had the responsibility to protect the tenants and the public in that environment. A few weeks ago, we saw the lawsuit that went through the trial, where the reporter from ESPN had been photographed in her room at a hotel by a stalker, and then those pictures were put up on the internet. And so she sued. As a result of that, the jury awarded damages, 51% of the liability to the stalker and 49% to the hotel. Now, the judgment was for $55 million. It'll probably be negotiated down. But again, the concept of accountability. In America today, we want to see someone accountable for this. And so as we think about this concept of visibility, that's going to impact us in a variety of ways as we go through and look at those areas. So this environment that we're in, you can't deny there is going to be accountability, and the information is out there, and it will always become a question of what did you know, when did you know it, what did you do, why did you take those actions, and come together. Now, when we think about crisis management and crisis communications, anytime there's an event, there's going to be a response. Those are the actions that you're going to do, and there's going to be some communications around that. So in a crisis, we're focused both on the management of the event and the consequences that result from it, as well as the communications that have to be made at this point in time. And we'll give you some insights into those communications as our conversation today continues. But how you respond, the words that you say, could in fact create a second crisis. And we've seen in the political contests that have been going on over the last weeks and months, it does seem almost like years now, and you'll see the politician making a statement and then people going, well, they're going to regret that. That's going to create more of a problem. So many times we see these communications trigger a second crisis. Now, crises generally don't last a long time. If you look at a tornado, it comes, it's through, it's gone in seconds or minutes. But it's the consequences that last for an extended period. So as we think on the subject of today, the visibility, vulnerability, we want to be able to think about what are the consequences from the actions that we become involved with. Now, before we get to that particular point, I want to talk about a media bias, a media conflict bias. Now, what the media is looking for in any event that occurs that's going to be a material one is they're looking for conflict. They go to one party and say, what do you think? And then that party will make a statement. Then they go to the other and say, this person has said this. What's your reaction to that? They then take that reaction and go back to the first, because this is how they build their ratings. And the ratings are driving advertisers and dollars. And so it's not about the public's right to know. It's about the entertainment business. And news has moved from being what some of us grew up with, Walter Cronkite, and the type of integrity that we see there, to being one now almost as we have television that is trying to find the conflict, trying to create a reality version that would draw people in. And so in the media's role here today is to identify the conflict, bring that up, and keep it focused. But if one side doesn't participate, the conflict drops quickly and you move on. And so one of the things that we will talk about today is a communications commitment and a transparency that could be done by dealing directly with those stakeholders that are important to you instead of dealing through the media to get to your stakeholders that you're focused on. So we want to frame the rest of our discussion in light of this conflict bias that exists today. Now, as we go forward and think about visibility vulnerability, and that was the title of today's discussion, now you see me, now you don't. Now, some visibility is good. If you are growing your business, or you're opening a new plant, you're adding a new product, you've gotten a great review, that visibility is good. And so I would say that when we think about that type of visibility, we think about it in peacetime. If you are in a crisis, it's more like a war environment, and you become the target. What you do and what you say will become a significant factor on your organization and have a direct impact. So as we think about visibility, when we're trying to give out positive news, we want to get that as widespread as we can. When we think about negative news, then what we want to do is to try to deal with our stakeholders directly, because we're going to be the target associated with it. So there are two definitions of visibility vulnerability that I want us to focus on as we build this analysis today. First is being placed in a position of public awareness so that anything we say will have more intention and direction. You've seen that already in the political campaigns of this year. So the comment would have a disproportionate impact because you're in the middle of a crisis and anything you say will be done. And part of what we do is work with organizations and tell them that most of what you know initially is going to be incorrect, and you do not want to make a statement early into this area that will further exacerbate the reaction. So what you comment on will place a different emphasis as a result of the crisis that you find yourself in that vulnerability is there. The other vulnerability is one of not you speaking out, but you being aware of what's going on, and that's that second definition there. If you don't have an intelligence network, then you're going to find out that others know more about the events that are there, and it's going to put you into a situation where you're explaining and thus losing. So trying to keep all those dominoes from falling down in the bottom right-hand side makes it become much more difficult for you in these areas. So this is a factor that's generally ignored. You're going to find that you're going to get pressure within your organization that says, someone on the board or someone says, you know, we've got to frame the discussion, we have to get out in front of this, we need to talk and do the media interviews, and that's going to be the wrong strategy. That's going to not get you the results that you're looking for in this particular area. So think about these two areas. One is what you're saying, the other is what you're knowing. Those are going to become vulnerabilities that will be intensified in a crisis. Now, to illustrate that, you should all see a series of dots on your screen here. This is not some kind of a psychiatric test today to see if there's a particular problem. You'll see some of those are gray and some of those are white, different intensities. Can anybody point to where their company is there? And the answer is no, I don't see my company at this point. It's blended in with everyone else. Now imagine that if you're in crisis, you should start to see a red dot. Well, you can see the company. You're going to understand, wait a minute, that's the one that we're talking about. And that's what happens. You get a different level of visibility when you find yourself in a crisis. Now, how you communicate and how you respond, and if you participate in getting involved in the conflict, it's going to cause this thing to change. But if you focus your communications directly back to your stakeholders, if you carry that level, you'll start to blend in. And in a crisis environment, that's a good thing. And so we're back to where we were. We don't see our company. We don't see the situation that we're involved in. But clearly, if you start to communicate, if you start to deal through the media, you become directly visible, and our red dot returns. But it doesn't just return as that. It grows so it dominates the news. It dominates what's being said, what your competition knows about your organization. This is the most critical area for you to focus on as you think about your organization. So where are you? In this one, I think I can see the red dot pretty clearly, and you've seen it grow within this environment. So who knows? This is the one about keeping the intelligence and the knowledge of what's going around you. Well, other people know. Your people know. Your employees know what's going on. Your customers know about it. The media has an awareness of what's happening out there. There's a lot of discussion in social media. And so having an intelligence network that's routing you this information becomes absolutely critical. And it will help you put the puzzle pieces together to understand how do we get to where we are, what are the impacts associated with this, where do we need to go, and what do we need to do. So as our friendly little person there is listening, we're going to talk some about that. So how do you know what you don't know? And I think you may have seen this chart and some other programs and discussions, but this is at the heart of the matter when we think about visibility, vulnerability. You'll see that slice of the pie is what you know. You've done the work, you've done a vulnerability threat assessment for your organization, you've done a hazard matrix, you've identified a lot of the vulnerabilities that are out there, and you know those, and you've built plans in place to deal with them. You certainly can craft messages around that to communicate. You've got emergency plans or business recovery plans. You've bought insurance to cover your exposures there to help the organization. There's some of what you know you don't know. And in those areas, you may have bought insurance to help cover some of the risk. Some of your plans will directly apply in that area. But if you'll notice, the largest part of that circle is what you don't know you don't know. That uncertainty and that liability is really where our focus is as we think about the environment that we find our businesses and schools in today, is focusing on dealing with each of those particular activities in the market. So we're going to try to see if we can make the orange portion of this circle less and get that over into one of the two other buckets. But looking at doing that is the real risk factor that we find. And so that crisis then transition into consequences that will last for an extended period for our company. So are you currently using external intelligence to identify these potential risks? And we did a survey of about 500 companies, and you see the results on your screen. And a little less than a third said, yeah, we monitor social media. Now, probably everybody on the call at least looks at weather reports to have that as an intelligence stream within your organization, but most don't go well beyond it. So for every vulnerability and threat that you've identified, you need to equally identify what is our intelligence strategy to see if whatever we're concerned about is about to occur. Here, if you took the know and the don't know and added those together, at 67%, 2/3 of the companies that took part in the survey had no intelligence network to see if what they were concerned about was about to occur. That's going to place them in a continual state of being surprised, and generally, as we've said, that's not good. So as you grow in your job and responsibility as a business continuity professional or a leader within your company, building an intelligence network is a key element. So that's going to change where we are. So how do you predict? Well, you've got to build this intelligence network. Think about each type of vulnerability that you see and start to design what's a warning sign that could be occurring. And then what's a trigger? How bad does it get before we activate our plan and take specific actions? So those elements we'll go a little bit more into that today, because if you don't have an intelligence network, you're operating in the dark. And that's going to create a significant impact on your business and on your ability to respond to what's occurring throughout this element. So what I'd like you to do is to think about that at each step along the way and we'll give you some more insights. Now, one of the things as we're thinking about consequence management, there is a concept that came out of the military: observe, orient, decide, and act. And that type of a feedback loop will become very important if you find yourself in a crisis. And it is going to be a situation where the initial information that you learn is wrong. And so the first thing I'm going to tell you about crisis management or consequence management is that you'll be wrong. Recognizing that, you have to have a continual feedback loop coming back forward to let you know the assumptions that you made. I saw the early reports on the bombings in Brussels this morning, and it was a dozen, then it was 20, then it was 26, and now it's 31 dead. The wounded is over 130 that have already been identified. And there's obviously confusion that occurs. So you observe, you orient, decide, and act. This OODA loop is a great step that you can work with adults in a business environment. If you have an active shooter in the building, if it's at one end of the building and you're in the other, then the best strategy is for you to evacuate. So you observe, you orient where you are relative to the problem, you make a decision, and then you don't wait, you act immediately, because that timing window makes a big difference. So our goal here is to understand what's going on, to decide, to act, monitor. Remember, we're making decisions based on what's probably wrong information, and then adjust. That's an important element for us within this area to continue. Now, if you want to focus in a crisis and you're trying to make decisions, we have to focus on what's known, not what we think, but what it is we know, and then predict what's going to happen, what the consequence of this would be. You then develop your plan, and then you perform. That falls into that predict, plan, perform methodology you've heard us discuss many different times. Now, here's a helpful hint. When you find yourself having to lead your team and to focus on making decisions in a crisis, take it out a piece of paper and start writing down the facts. The mere fact that you are putting this in writing helps you focus mentally on what it is that you know and what the facts are. We would also encourage you to jot down the time that you learned that fact, the source, and determine, has that been verified? Is it still at a rumor level? Is it something that is more substantive to you at this point in time? That will help guide you in making the decisions that are very, very critical at this point in time. You'll then start to identify action priorities. Those will be part of your plan that you think about. And then you'd assign them to someone because you're not going to be able to go and do it. We need to know how many of our people were not at work today. We need to know how many people were able to get out. We need to know how many customers were impacted. You can't go and gather that information yourself if you're guiding the decisions that are being made in the crisis at this point. So what you would do is assign that to someone with a follow-up time. How long will it take you to find out who was not at work today? We can get that in 20 minutes. Great. All right, look at my watch, and then we'll get back with you. Get back with us and let us know. And then follow back up. Did you find that out? Let's confirm what we've got. You're also going to identify some activities that you're not going to do right now. We're not going to worry about getting messages out to customers immediately in the disaster. We're going to focus on our employees first. So we'll write down a pending action that we would get a message out to our employees later as a follow-up. And as you're thinking about each one of these things in the crisis and trying to make a decision here, what is it that you know? What are you concerned about? What is your plan? What are you going to monitor? How are you going to monitor it? Who's responsible for monitoring it? What are you going to communicate, and how are you going to communicate that? And we're going to tell you in advance, it's always going to be better if you communicate, to communicate directly with the stakeholders. Have the conversation with your employees. Have the conversation with your customers. You don't need to go to the media to have that conversation. Now, many times we've talked about the 5 common failures in a disaster or crisis, but the number 3 on the list is the failure to identify and monitor all of the threats and risks that are out there. And so this monitoring element and then gathering the information at a critical time will yield a much higher outcome for you and your organization. Now, this is a transparency communications commitment, and we have two versions of this, one for schools and one for businesses. But if you think about it, in a business environment, communications is a continuous improvement process. Communications with the media in a crisis does not benefit customers, vendors, employees, families, staff, leadership, board members, or the organization as a whole. So we're going to start on that premise. We inform our stakeholders of how we're going to align with this commitment, and we're going to communicate directly. We're going to coordinate in the communications there, and in a crisis, there are three types of communications we give: coordination, crisis, and compliance. Coordination is, what do I need to do right now? Evacuate, shelter, this is where you go, this is where you can find additional information. That's always the first communication in a crisis. The second communication is those communications related to our brand and reputation. And then the last is the communication that is compliance. We have to inform certain people of information. You want to protect all the information. We can't talk about an employee to a third party. We can't talk about one customer to another. We have to protect that information. And we're going to only communicate after the crisis is stabilized. So while the fire is in the building, while we're still trying to find out, we're not worried about communicating with anybody outside of it. Our only communication at that point is coordination of what our people need to be doing. We then will coordinate with authorities if we see an employee or any member who is at risk. And then finally, we're going to let our people know how we're going to communicate. We're going to put a letter up on our website. We're going to make a phone call. We're going to send a text message. We're going to send an email on how we do it. Now, you'll see this commitment change when we think about it for a school. It's the same basic elements that we've talked about above, but we've now substituted in the school areas, because clearly a school cannot talk with parents about children that are not their own. So by identifying this in advance, it gets you out of having to communicate through the media to get this information out. And if you had an open letter to your students or to your parents and posted it on your website, then all the media could do is to cite that letter. You remove the interpretation and the ability of the media to take a soundbite and use that negatively in this particular environment. So as you start to do it, and we've talked about the intelligence monitoring earlier, sometimes we think about behaviors, and you see here a list of behaviors. It's easier to see those evidences. Sometimes you've heard us talk about fraud. You can't see fraud, you can only see the evidence of it. So in looking at this, if you were dealing with a child in a school, I think you'd see a lot of things here that could become warning signs that would be an indication. So you want to train people as when we think about behaviors of concern to what are the warning signs within it. We can think about each one of the vulnerabilities and risks that you've identified and what are the warning signs that they're about to occur. Now, on the screen now you see awareness training around evacuate, lockdown, lockout, and shelter. A description of what it is, what's the condition that would cause an action, what's the directive you would give, what's the action that you want to have taken. Hazard matrix can be created for any particular exposure, whether it's a natural disaster, loss of infrastructure, power, communications, brand and reputation, any particular violence that's associated to be put in place. And so you've got now the term, the condition for action, the directive, and the action that you would want to have taken. And in all of this, people have to know, how would you communicate? I selected an example, again, of a behavior of concern in a school environment, but this could be equally true for behaviors of concern at work, someone that's having substance abuse problems or used to be doing well in meetings and now is arriving late, is argumentative, and looking at it. How do you let that incident get reported and communicated throughout it, and understanding that reporting structure? It's a key element in the awareness and the intelligence that you would gain. Now, we always look at, in crisis management scenarios, how do we do? And there's a maturity model, whether we're thinking about cyber breach response, workplace violence, or crisis decision-making, or business continuity. But in this crisis management, look at the areas that we're focused on, the dimensions: the decision process, the roles and responsibilities, the information clarity, the speed of decision-making, and the communications effectiveness. Now, that speed of decision-making goes back to the OODA, observe, orient, decide, and act, that we talked about just a few minutes ago. Clearly, the decision process and the roles and responsibilities. But if you'll notice the other two critical elements, information clarity and communications effectiveness, and that's going to be intensified in a crisis environment as you experience it. So what can you do? Well, first, think about establishing an intelligence network. Look at the hazard matrix that you have, or the vulnerability threat assessment for your organization, or the what keeps you up at night. Put your team around the table and focus on those and say, what are the warning signs? What are the indicators that this could be occurring? What's the level that it has to get that would trigger and activate our plan? Do the training with your employees. If it's on cyber breach, we have to let everybody know what to be thinking about in those particular areas. And do a security assessment of your organization. Plan, then develop a crisis response and communications plan with message maps. For every vulnerability and hazard that you've thought of, what are the messages that you would send? What's your first message, your second, and your third? Writing them down in advance will empower you to be able to get the right message out and not be misunderstood. Waiting to the crisis to occur, waiting until it's your people that have had the impact, it's too late. You don't want someone under stress crafting that message. You want to have it in place in advance. Then perform, training your people again. There are two opportunities on the horizon that you might want to take advantage of, and they are at no cost. So that's a pretty great opportunity. We're going to be doing on April 7th a virtual exercise geared for schools, both public and private and independent, on sexting and cyberbullying. Significant exposure that we see in our schools today, and recognizing it and understanding how to react. If you're a business that's on a call, and you might want to see that the school that your children go to attend that particular event, it's a great opportunity. This is a significant threat, and we're going to be focusing here in the exercise of having the crisis team in the school sit down and make decisions, and to understand the visibility factor here. How do they know that this is occurring, and what are they going to communicate and do as we carry that forward? The second virtual exercise in April will be one on a cyber breach. It'll be a cyber crisis that's occurred. It'll be businesses. The last time we did this was December, and we had 890 companies participate in that exercise. We had half of the Fortune 500. This is an opportunity for you to put your crisis team around the table, and we're going to be focusing here on a cyber breach as a business problem, not as an IT problem, because it's going to be, what decisions do you need to make, what communications do you need to put out, how do you understand and see that's being discovered. So there will be an opportunity for you to have your crisis team around the table and then sit there and participate and make those decisions and share that back. Both of those two exercises are going to be 2 hours in length, and they'll be at 2 p.m. Eastern for each of those two. I would also encourage you to start to do something you haven't done in the past as well, from a business continuity and a crisis management perspective, is to do an analysis of your insurance, thinking particularly about that unknown that we've talked about, and look at how does your insurance adequately cover you, and how your current response plans fit into play. And then we're creating a user group of those that are focused on behaviors of concern and implementing a program within their schools or businesses at how they respond to these behaviors of concern. So you have some very specific next steps. You also will be able to download a brief from today's webinar, and you can go to Firestorm.com and go to briefs, and you'll see it. You'll also get an email after today's webinar with a chance to click the link and go there. We also will have this webinar recorded, so you can share it with others within your organization, or if you want to go back through it, you can listen to it again. And again, that's part of the program that we're doing with the University of Alabama to make this information available to everyone. So Brenda, any reactions to our discussions today about visibility, vulnerability, and what organizations need to be thinking about?
Well, I just wanted to comment that I had participated in a couple of your virtual exercises, and I found real value in that, and I believe that if any of folks listening have an opportunity, that it would be a worthwhile experience. You know, we just all have to be much more aware. I traveled out of the country last week and found myself thinking like Jim, like, look ahead, you know, what would you do, where would you go? And, you know, it's just the world we live in, so our businesses are definitely impacted by that. And, you know, we didn't used to have to worry about it, but we do now, and the best thing to do is to have a plan. And so I just echo everything you said, and what a great job.
Well, Brenda, we appreciate all that you and the University of Alabama does, and I would encourage organizations that are looking for training in a particular area or the support to have that resource directly available. And you don't have to be in Alabama. You don't have to be a graduate of the University of Alabama to get that support, but it is there and it's available because it's Bama at work. If you'd like to view this again, you can go to Firestorm.com. If you've got a question, you can drop us an email at webinars@firestorm.com or pick up the phone and call us at 800-321-2219. We're going to make an attempt to reach out to everyone on today's webinar to see if you've got questions or if we can supply some additional help to you in thinking about those particular areas. I think that I'm reminded of an Irish blessing or an Irish curse that says, may you live in interesting times. And I think every day when we look and see the stories that are emerging from the violence that's occurring and with the terrorist acts that we've seen today in Brussels, to the violence that occurs in the workplace, to the shootings that occur in schools and businesses, to the tornado period that we're in now and the coming hurricane season on June 1. We face a variety of vulnerabilities. I think it's all of our responsibility to make sure that we have an intelligence network to know that what we're concerned about is it about to occur. I also know that if there is ever a crisis, we're going to have to take actions, and most organizations have done a good job at least beginning to think about emergency plans and actions to take, or recovery plans for particular businesses and departments and actions. But you need to take that same level of intensity and focus on what are our communications, what are our message maps, what are we going to say if this happens, and how are we going to do it. Planning in advance this concept of having a transparency communications commitment that you're going to communicate directly with your stakeholders and educating them that if there's ever a problem, we're going to come to you directly. We're not going to communicate with you through the media. You're going to find that the results of that will be significantly better, and the consequences of whatever has occurred will be reduced and under control. Remember, this is going to come as a surprise, and not every surprise is a good one. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for all that you do, and until next month, this is Jim Satterfield from Firestorm, wishing you a great spring. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.